Hello everyone, Mike McConville here again, Stratford, Ontario, Canada for StringTechWorkstations. As promised, I'm delivering on my 10 guitar tech tools for $10. Well, let's start with this box of tongue depressors, 500 of them for $12.89. That's 2.5 cents each. What do we use tongue depressors for, you ask? Okay, well this is a guard for edge dressing. I'm just getting ready to fill those fret ends. So I tape this to the soundboard to protect it so that when I level with the sanding sticks, we don't scratch the top. So there's one tool, that was about 2 cents. Oh, my little pointer stick, I suppose that's 2 cents as well. And seeing as I'm getting my 2 cents worth, there's a radius gauge, 2 cents, tongue depressor. Here's a glue scoop up stick, 2 cents. Here's a self-adjusting radius gauge. Well, I put a 10-cent price on that one because you have a little piece of foam under there. You've seen these in videos that I've done. Here's the riser block that I used when I was routing out the bridge slot, and it's a hockey puck, of course. Hockey pucks are 99 cents. Here's a little clamp pad, that's worth about 20 cents. And here's a piece of a hockey puck that I use for wet sanding. So I guess you could assign another maybe 15 cents to that piece. And of course, we've got machinist rules. Imperial on one side, metric on the other. So there's another $2. And the ever useful feeler gauge set, also $1.99. So what I have here is 9 sanding sticks, and you'll see them as I complete them. So 2-sided tape, I've shaped those tongue depressors, glued them to that 2-sided tape, and we'll adhere the sandpaper to that, and you'll see that before the end of the video. Well, I put a $4 value on our triple radius gauge, and when we add everything up that we just covered, we have a grand total of $9.81 Canadian, or $7.36 US. When you take into account that soundboard guard that I just showed you a second ago on that guild for doing the edge dress, that's 11 tools. 11 tools for $7.36 US. Like most old-time techs, I'm big on the vernacular, just using stuff that's lying around. There's lots of materials that are readily available. For any of you that have been watching my channel, there's many times where you've seen me use hockey pucks for a multitude of reasons. So at 99 cents, I buy about 20. I dropped $20 and I got like a 5-year supply. 10 guitar tech tools for much less than $10. Cheers. So I've got my 2-sided tape on those tongue depressors. These are my 80 grit sticks, so I'll cut those out first and do both sides. So we have a 2-sided 80 grit sanding stick. Okay, so that's one side. Peel and stick and do the other side. So I do 80 grit, 120, and 180, and that tends to serve most of the jobs that I need to do. I do have 400 grit that I get in a roll, and I'll make up finer sticks as I need them. This is just a ultra high molecular density plastic that I use for cutting this stuff. There's our 380 grit sticks. So lastly, we'll get our 180 grit. And there you go, 9 sanding sticks, double-sided, so really essentially 18 sanding sticks, 180, 120, and 80 grit. And they're basically a nickel a piece. Here's the wrap-up. $12.89 for 500 tongue depressors, works out to about 2.5 cents each. Riser block, hockey puck. Wet sanding block, hockey puck. Clamping pads of all shapes and forms, hockey puck. And a hockey puck, 99 cents. Machinist rules, you flip them over, you got imperial and metric for $1.99. So we essentially have 11 Guitar Tech tools, not 10, for $9.81 Canadian or $7.36 US. We got our triple radius, 9.5, 14, and 17-inch radius stick. And there's our sanding sticks, 80 grit, 180, and 120. There's our little radius gauge. You've seen me make that up before. A little scoop-up stick. If you look at my acoustic guitar bridge glue video, you'll see me use these little scoop-up sticks. And of course your trusty feeler gauge, $1.99 at the local surplus store. And that about wraps it up for this episode. There's lots more vernacular stuff that you can get just about anywhere for next to nothing when you're working on guitars. Keep in touch. Got lots more to show you. Okay, what we've got here is this Guild guitar that we're actually changing the trajectory of the neck to body angle by taking more out of the fingerboard on this end, which in this case it ends up taking out all those finger gouges. So we have managed to change that angle. What you see here is you see the 3rd fret and you see the 13th fret. I've put those in because they're my pilot frets. So when I put that big long straight edge on there and I run to the bridge, you can see that I'm just about kissing that bridge. Now this is a bit of an exception because that bridge is much thinner than it should actually be. So I filled in that through route. I'm going to reroute that because the depth of that slot was not deep enough to properly support a saddle. In a perfect world, 2/3 of the saddle should be into the body of the bridge and 1/3 should be proud of the bridge, and that gives you the stability that you need and the adjustability that you need to match the radius of the fingerboard to the proper height. So I'm happy with those pilot frets. We've established that now. Now we can finish the fret job. This is a 151 thou fret, 100 wide, 51 thou high. These are from the folks at Jesscar there in New York. I get it by the pound. So we're ready now to put the rest of the frets in. So when I put that straight edge up on the center of those frets and I run it along the crowns and up to the bridge, it just barely kisses the top of that rosewood. That is the perfect neck angle. Okay, I have filled in that through slot with a piece of rosewood, and after doing the math I can see that this guitar was never in tune. This line represents the compensation values. We're actually going to do a stop route, so we're not going to through route. Now this line at the front of the bridge is the theoretical distance, so the scale length is 62.5 millimeters, so that brings us to this line. This is the distance that we added for compensation, and you'll see when we're done this guitar will be perfectly in tune for the first time since it was made. I left that tape on for you, the viewers. Just checking the depth of that saddle slot. What we got right now is 5 millimeters. The total depth of the bridge is 6.5. We're going to stick with that. This is considerably deeper than the original saddle was. Sometimes it's easier to illustrate by showing you the jig as I take it apart so I can explain what I've done. So essentially we have these plates that I get made up for my students. I've been doing this for years. And then I have a plexiglass template that follows the trajectory of the cutter. So I use this as my indexing plate, so before I flick the switch on the router, I know exactly where that cut is going to be. These are obviously paper clips, and you know, like I've said so many times before, I started into this game long before the existence of sort of guitar shop supply places. So like most of the pro techs I know, old timers, you kind of make it up as you go. So once again, these plates I made up for my students, and a bunch of TechDeck owners have ordered them as well. So underneath this plate I have sections of hockey pucks. Hockey pucks are the perfectly engineered rubber. They have 100% traction, so when you put a little bit of pressure on them, there's no way that jig is sliding, and zero compression. This is a vernacular thing, an easily attainable thing, 99 cents for a hockey puck, slices up like cheese on the bandsaw. There'll be a lot more on hockey pucks before this video is done. Happy with that? We can now make our saddle and seriously intonate this guitar for the first time since it was made. So here's another hockey puck trick. We have that pine caul on the top. This is how I'm gluing down that overlay for the headstock. I just fed a little bit of epoxy in there actually, and I don't use epoxy very often, but this is one of those cases where I do. And I've got that hockey puck underneath so that we don't bruise the back of the neck. And same deal on this side. Well, since we're on a roll with this super affordable Guitar Tech Tools tips, I thought I'd go the extra mile. Here's some 320 grit sanding sticks. I did up 3 of those a minute ago. We've surpassed 10 tools now. We're on to 12 or 14. This LED light is $5.99 at the local surplus store. Now, I also have these rubber bands that I pick up for 88 cents, also at the surplus store. And what I do is I kind of hang them around my neck and then turn on the light so that when I'm doing all of my detailing, it lights the edge of that fingerboard up like daylight. So this is the view that I get with that light hanging around my neck with the rubber band. This side is done, on to the next side. Okay, we're on to the other side now, and once again we start with our 2-cent tongue depressor. Now this protects against, obviously against the sanding, but it's also a heat shield. When you're heating up that lacquer stick to get underneath those frets where there's any voids, you're not touching the soundboard. So it's heat shield and sanding shield. 2 cents. Well, this hardly even needs to be filled, but for illustration purposes, and I still want to do a little mini tutorial for your sake. So what I have here is I've mixed up these 3 colors, which are extra dark walnut, deep red mahogany, and black, and I've mixed them up onto this tongue depressor and sort of swirled them together. This gives us a pretty good match for this Brazilian rosewood. Deep red mahogany, extra dark walnut, and a touch of black. So we'll start up at the top end. So I'm using that tongue depressor as my palette actually to kind of mix the colors. We don't really need a lot of touch up on this one, but I thought for illustration purposes I would. So just a little dot under each fret. So I go along the full length first and just put a little dab on each fret position, and then we'll heat that lacquer stick again and let it kind of flow. and that will fill any voids underneath the fret. So the idea, as always, is to kind of cover your tracks so when you're finished it should look like the guitar hasn't even been touched. Now this is quite a bit bigger fret than those original frets, and the reason for the high frets is we needed to get a little bit more height on the saddle, and putting the higher frets in and then sanding the neck, as you saw earlier, changed the trajectory of the neck to body angle along the fingerboard surface, and that gave us enough of a saddle at the bridge that allows us to be able to adjust the saddle crown for the radius of the frets, and also to be able to intonate it. I've got my 3 gauges of sanding stick. I just wipe lightly with that 80 grit and just get that real craggy stuff off. Okay, that's enough for the 80 grit. We're going to switch over to 120 now. Yeah, so that's just a couple of quick strokes with the 80 grit, and we've kind of got that real heavy, craggy stuff off. And now we're going to switch over to the 120 grit. So here's a close-up of that 120 grit in action. You can see pretty well takes every trace of the lacquer stick off, and it really gives us a beautiful match to that Brazilian rosewood, mixing those 3 colors together. Here's my 320 grit. So this is our basically our final run here. That's our finish there. I am going to steel wool that with 4-0 steel wool, and then finally with a light compound we'll cover our tracks completely. Here's our 120. It doesn't take long, just a few strokes. Once you're all set up, now we'll switch over to the 180. These are those sticks that we just made up. 180. Lastly, our 400 grit. And that is going to give us the finish that we want. So we'll finish that up with a little bit of 4-0 steel wool, and now we're going to take our masking tape off. Lastly, I've got some ebony compound, so it's a very fine liquid compound, and it's given us that very final finish that we want. And again, we're covering our tracks so that nobody'd ever know this guitar was ever refretted. That's the idea. Liking it. Okay, now we're really on the home stretch. Before I blend the bridge in with the smoked ebony stain, I just wanted to show you, this is the original saddle. You see where it was? This obviously is where I cut. This guitar has never played in tune since the day it was made. So this is the last little touch-up. I just wanted to show you that before I wipe the smoked ebony stain on there. And just blend it all in. The stain is actually smoked ebony. It's translucent, as you can see. You can see through it. Kind of wipe it on and wipe it off. And that gives us the blend that we want. We'll put our saddle back in and string it up for the last time. Careful not to get any oil on the end of the fingerboard here. We need to glue the nut in, so again, you gotta wipe it on, wipe it off. And here's another use for those tongue depressors. Just pull those strings out of the way while we glue the nut in. As you know, we removed the original saddle, reslotted the bridge for proper intonation, installed a new saddle that was radiused, a little bit thicker too, for better intonation. So the new saddle, being 1/8 of an inch, allowed a lot more forgiveness for intonation all the way across. You'll hear it in a second. Plays perfectly in tune. But before we go there, again, to reiterate, refretted the whole fingerboard. These are 51/100 frets, 51 thou high, 100 wide. And as you saw earlier, we kind of edge dressed, and we gave you a little lesson there on filling those ends and polishing them up to cover your tracks. And of course, we've got the compensated nut. Now these are 11 to 52 strings at concert pitch. So we dropped it down from 12 to 53 to 11 to 52. A difference of about 12 pounds load. This guitar is extremely light, and I did have this conversation with the customer and suggested that he step it down just that little tiny bit. You wait till you hear the voice on this thing. It's absolutely gorgeous. That's a view of the neck. So we changed the trajectory of the neck angle by taking more off the fingerboard on this end, and it saved us getting into a neck reset. It was unnecessary because now, if you look at the saddle and the bridge, we actually have a fair amount of adjustment there. We could come down a little bit as the guitar pulls up even more over the next few decades. Enough talk. Let's have a listen. Okay, let's start with the most obvious tuning test, the open string and 12th fret. And then open string 1st fret.